From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. Friends and family often admired our relationship, saying we balanced each other out so well. I was the organized, disciplined one, always planning things ahead and keeping a steady routine. He, on the other hand, was full of energy, more easygoing, and enjoyed the thrill of doing things on a whim. He loved being around people, always eager for social gatherings or spontaneous adventures, while I preferred a quieter, more structured life, focusing on my goals and keeping things in order. Despite our differences in personality, we shared a strong foundation based on values that really mattered to both of us. We were both deeply dedicated to our careers, putting in the hard work to build stable, fulfilling lives. At the same time, we respected each other's need for independence. He had his interests, and I had mine. We each had space to grow and pursue our own paths without constantly depending on each other for validation. I believe that this blend of independence and partnership was what made our relationship solid. It allowed us to be our own people while still coming together as a team, creating a balance that felt unique and lasting. I've never been the type of person who needs constant attention or reassurance in a relationship. I had my own life, my own dreams and goals, and I was proud of that independence. He seemed to feel the same way. He was focused on his career and his personal interests. We both had our own space, and it felt like a healthy balance. We didn't cling to each other or feel the need to check in constantly, and I respected that about us. I believed that our independence was a strength, something that made our relationship mature and stable. But looking back now, I realized there were small signs I chose to ignore. Sometimes he felt distant, like he was only halfway present when we were together. His words, once warm and genuine, started to feel more like polite responses, lacking the sincerity they used to have. I noticed it, of course, those brief moments when he seemed miles away even as he sat next to me. But each time, I brushed it off, convincing myself that he was just tired or preoccupied. I trusted that we were both deeply committed to the life we had built together. I thought our mutual respect and independence were enough to keep us strong, so I never let myself question his loyalty. Now, I see how much I overlooked, mistaking distance for routine and brushing off my instincts in the name of trust. A few years ago, my husband made the decision to get a vasectomy. We had discussed the idea of having children early in our relationship and quickly agreed that parenthood wasn't for us. It wasn't because we didn't like children. It was just that we valued the freedom to focus on our careers, travel, and build the life we wanted without the intense commitment that comes with raising a family. We felt confident in this choice, almost relieved that we could plan our future with just the two of us in mind. After he had the procedure, we decided there was no need to use any extra protection during intimacy. The vasectomy was supposed to be permanent, a final step in ensuring we wouldn't have children. To me, this felt like a shared, mature decision, a symbol of our mutual understanding and trust in each other. We rarely even talked about it afterward. It became part of our routine, something we took for granted. In my mind, it was one of those unspoken agreements that held us together, proof that we were on the same page about our future and what we wanted out of life. For a while, our life seemed steady and predictable. We fell into a comfortable routine, busy days at work, quiet evenings at home, and the occasional date night to keep things fresh. It felt like we had found a rhythm that worked for us, balancing our careers with quality time together. I enjoyed the sense of stability, believing we were building a life that was strong and reliable. But then, little things started to shift. He began coming home later than usual, at first by just an hour or so. He'd say he was staying late to finish up important projects or attending team-building events with colleagues. I didn't question it. I know how demanding work can be, and I trusted him completely. I figured these were normal demands of his job, something temporary that would pass. But as the late nights became more frequent, I noticed a change in his tone and manner. He seemed more distracted, less interested in sharing details about his day, brushing off my questions with vague answers. Still, I pushed any doubts aside, convincing myself that he was just busy and that our life together was as strong as ever. As time went on, his late nights became more common, almost routine. At first, I didn't question it. We both had demanding careers, and I knew how work could sometimes stretch beyond office hours. But gradually, I started noticing subtle changes in his behavior that felt out of place. He seemed more distracted, like his mind was always somewhere else, even when we were together. Conversations that used to flow easily between us now felt strained. When I'd ask simple questions about his day, he would give short, almost rehearsed answers, as if he was in a hurry to change the topic. His explanations for the late nights also started to feel vague, lacking the detail he used to share so naturally. He'd just say it was work-related or a team-building thing, a way to get closer to his colleagues. It sounded reasonable, but something about the way he said it felt off. I tried to push down the uneasy feeling growing inside me, convincing myself that I was just overthinking. After all, I trusted him, and I wanted to believe there was nothing more to it. But deep down, that small, nagging doubt wouldn't go away, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. Then, one night, everything changed. He stumbled through the door well past midnight, and from the moment I saw him, I knew something was wrong. His shirt was untucked and wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes, once so clear and focused, looked dull and unfocused, as if he couldn't even see me standing there. A heavy smell of alcohol surrounded him, filling the air with a sharp, bitter scent. He swayed unsteadily, barely able to keep himself upright. I rushed over to steady him, gently guiding him to the couch, trying to keep myself calm even though my mind was racing with questions. He slumped down, muttering words that didn't make any sense, his voice slurred and almost unrecognizable. I knelt beside him, watching as he drifted in and out of consciousness, my heart pounding as I took in this unfamiliar version of him. As I reached down to gather his things, which had fallen from his bag and scattered across the floor, I felt my hand stop. There, lying in plain sight among his keys and phone, was a small, crumpled condom wrapper. My heart dropped. We hadn't used protection in years. The realization hit me like a wave, cold and unrelenting. This wasn't a forgotten item or an innocent mistake. It was a sign, a painful, undeniable clue that shattered everything I thought I knew. In that moment, everything around me felt silent and still, as if the world had paused, leaving only me and that small, damning piece of evidence on the floor. My mind went blank, then filled with 100 thoughts all at once. How long had this been going on? How could I have missed the signs? We hadn't used protection in years. It was something we simply didn't need anymore. So when I saw that condom wrapper lying there, it felt like a hard punch to my stomach, knocking the breath out of me. In an instant, so many small, confusing moments suddenly made sense. The late nights he claimed were just work, the vague excuses that always felt just a little too thin, the sudden coldness that had crept into our lives like a quiet shadow. It was painfully clear now. He had been unfaithful. A wave of shock and anger washed over me, fierce and overwhelming. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind, so trusting? I'd believed him, never questioning, never doubting. And yet, here I was, faced with undeniable proof that the man I had trusted without a second thought had betrayed me. When I confronted him the next morning, I expected guilt, or at the very least, some kind of explanation. I thought he might apologize, look me in the eyes, and tell me he was sorry for the pain he'd caused. But instead, his response left me speechless. Rather than showing any hint of remorse, he immediately became defensive, his face twisting with anger. He didn't acknowledge my feelings or admit any fault. Instead, he lashed out at me, accusing me of violating his privacy. He said I had crossed boundaries, as if I was somehow the one at fault for uncovering the truth. His hostility was shocking, like a wall slamming down between us. His words were sharp, cold, filled with accusations that made me feel small, as though my hurt didn't matter. It was as if he was offended that I even dared to question him, that my discovery of his betrayal was an inconvenience to him rather than a painful reality for me. The anger in his eyes was something I'd never seen before, a fierceness that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. Standing there, I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. This man, who I had trusted so deeply, was now acting as though I was the one who had done something wrong. He spoke to me with a coldness and disdain that I could hardly recognize. It was as if he had turned into someone else entirely, someone I didn't know at all. The person I thought I knew, the man I had shared so much of my life with, seemed to have vanished, replaced by a stranger who had no regard for my pain. This wasn't the man I had built a life with. This was someone new, someone distant and unkind, and it left me feeling lost and alone in a way I never imagined. Then, as if he couldn't handle my presence, he turned on his heel and stormed into the kitchen. He grabbed a bottle from the counter, his movements rough and angry, accidentally knocking over a glass that shattered onto the floor. I stood there, frozen, watching this man I thought I knew, now spiraling into a rage that made no sense. The intensity of his anger, the way he blamed me for everything, it was like a terrible nightmare unfolding in front of my eyes. I tried to reach out to the person I knew, but he was no longer there. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me, and met his eyes. My voice was steady, but I could hear the cracks in it, the hurt that I could no longer hide. "This isn't the life I want anymore," I told him, my words carrying all the sadness and disappointment that had built up inside me. "I don't even recognize who we've become, but I know one thing for sure, I can't stay in this." For the first time, his anger faded, replaced by a look of pure shock. It was as if he hadn't ever imagined that his choices could truly end what we had. Maybe, deep down, he thought our years together, the routines we shared, would somehow hold me in place, that I'd swallow the pain, forgive, and keep going. Maybe he thought that I wouldn't dare break away from the life we'd built. But standing there in that heavy, painful silence, I knew with all my heart that staying would only mean losing myself. It would mean living a life filled with secrets and half-truths, a life built on broken promises and empty words. And I couldn't do that, not anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. For so long, I believed that the stability we had created, our routines, our structured life, was like a shield that would protect us from any cracks or betrayals. I thought if we just stuck to the plan, kept everything in order, we'd be safe from the things that break other couples apart. But now I knew that no amount of discipline or routine could shield me from the pain of betrayal. Heartbreak isn't something you can control, no matter how hard you try to organize your life around it. That night, I made a choice. I quietly gathered a few of my belongings, essentials to get me through the next few days, and put them in a small bag. It felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream I didn't want to be in. Every step felt heavy, but there was also a strange lightness, a freedom in finally accepting the truth and deciding to walk away. When I reached the door, I paused, half expecting him to say something, anything. But he stood there, silent, watching me, his face expressionless. He didn't reach out, didn't ask me to stay. Maybe, in that moment, he understood that the damage was beyond repair, that I was already gone in my heart. As I stepped outside, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. I was leaving behind a life I'd poured myself into, yet I knew that staying would mean living a lie. In the weeks that followed, we began the process of filing for divorce. It was painful, like tearing down a house we had spent years building together, brick by brick. Each step, meeting with lawyers, dividing our belongings, signing the papers, felt heavy, like saying goodbye to a part of myself. But deep down, I knew it was something I had to do. Closing this chapter was the only way to free myself from the weight of a life that no longer felt real. Some days, sadness would wash over me, filling me with memories of happier times and making me question if things could have been different. Regret would sneak in, whispering questions of what I could have done to save our marriage. But other days, I felt moments of clarity, a sense of relief in knowing that I was choosing a path forward instead of staying in a life built on broken trust. Slowly, a newfound peace began to settle in, like a soft light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I realized that by letting go, I was giving myself a chance to heal, to rebuild, and to live a life that felt true again. As time passed, I slowly began to rediscover who I was without him. It wasn't easy at first. The pain of betrayal lingered, and the emptiness felt overwhelming. But little by little, I realized that my life didn't have to stop because he was no longer part of it. I could move forward, not just surviving but actually healing, finding joy, and eventually even thriving on my own. I didn't need the comfort of a relationship that only looked perfect from the outside, and I didn't have to carry the weight of that illusion anymore. In letting go, I found a new kind of strength, one I didn't know I had. The decision to walk away had been incredibly difficult, but every day that passed reminded me it was the right one. I learned that some things simply can't be fixed, and clinging to something broken only drains you, leaving little room for happiness or growth. For too long, I had convinced myself that holding on to the relationship would somehow keep things intact, but in truth, it was holding me back. Though this wasn't the life I had imagined, I began to see a different future, one grounded in honesty and self-respect. I felt free, not just from a relationship that no longer served me, but from the fear of being alone. Whether or not someone else would come along didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was that I could live authentically, shaping a life that felt true to who I was becoming, with or without someone by my side.